Good morning. Today I have a interesting little idea. I felt a bit nostalgic about my teenage years, which is extremely rare because my teenage years sucked for the main part. And I looked around into my folders and saw that I kept damn near every single notebook I used from junior high all the way to my freshman year of college. So here it is, and I'm going to see how much of it I remember. Now, this video could be several hours long, or it could be 15 minutes long. Who knows? Point is, let's get straight to it, shall we? Okay, first order of business. Okay, well, here's a comic book for general vocab. Not sure if you can see that, but okay. That was my old address, too, by the way, so... Okay. If lost, please return to mailing address 515 3rd Street, Cottonwood Falls, Kansas 66845. Nostalgia. Okay. Geography, Unit 1 Vocab. Geography is a field of knowledge that studies the Earth. Physical geography is the study of natural change to the planet. Climatology is the study of the climate. Geomorphology is the study of how landforms change. Biogeography is the study of plants and animals. Oceanography is studying the ocean. Human geography is the study of human activity and their impact. Homogeneous is a region with shared traits. A nodal region is organized around a focal point. Vernacular region is based around customs of a region. Demographics is data used to understand traits of humans. Relative space gets its meaning when compared to similar spaces. A site is a physical location, and a scale is size of a space. Spatial interaction is studying how groups interact. Diffusion are cultures that share their cultures to others. Alex von Humboldt founded modern geography and came up with the isometric lines, is also the author of Cosmos. Carl Ritter discovered environmental determinism, 19 volumes of which. Carl Sauer was the author of The Morphology of Landscape. Social groups act based around their environment, which is the definition of environmental possibilism. Unit 2. Population density is the number of people in a fixed space. Oh, Jesus, yeah, this is my old geography textbook. Okay, see if I can... And for some reason, we went straight back to government. Okay. Okay, well, on the government part of this textbook, you've got a citizen born or naturalized in the United States. Natural rights are guaranteed rights. Public policy are government reactions to problems. Laws are rules established by governments. And the rule of law is a statement that pretty much means that nobody's above the law. Take that, Trump, you fucking fascist pig. Social contract is an idea that governments exist under the consent of the people. Keep that in mind, Trump, you fucking fascist pig. Federalism is the division of power via branches. For example, the United States has a separation of powers by having 3 main branches of federal government: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. None of them should override the other 2. Otherwise, you get one huge government instead of 3 separated branches of a federal government. It's called separation of powers and checks and balances. You don't have them, you don't have a country. Jus soli is the law of the land, and a visa is a special permission of residence. Civic duty are actions that are required among civilians, and civic responsibility are actions that aren't required. So, for example, a civic duty would be voting, doing jury duty, etc. A civic responsibility would be like joining the military. John Locke wrote about the idea of natural rights, and the Articles of Confederation was the failed first document of the federal government before the United States agreed upon ratification of the United States Constitution back in 1791. In the Constitution, you have Article 1, which is the legislative branch and its duties. In Article 2, you have the executive branch and its duties. And then in Article 3, you have the judicial branch and its duties. Article 4 is the powers of the states. And then Article 5 is the process of how amendments work. Article 6 is the Supremacy Clause. And Article 7 is ratification. The Virginia Plan was written by James Madison, and it believed that legislature, or the legislative branch, should be based solely on each state's population, aka the House of Representatives. However, the New Jersey Plan was legislature that was based on fixed equal seats, aka the Senate. The Great Compromise was a merging of these two ideas where the legislative branch would be separated by two different branches. A House of Representatives, which was based on population of states, and a Senate, which was based on fixed seats. Let's see, is there anything else in this one? Personal finance, okay. An economy is a range of economic activity, and an economic system is its means of production. Economics is a study of how money is created and used, and a gift economy is where goods and services are exchanged without returns. Barters are exchange goods without money. So, for example, if I had a load of socks and I needed gloves, I could exchange someone's gloves in exchange for some of my socks. A market economy means that the prices of products are decided by private investment. Laissez-faire is a pretty much hands-off approach where the government does not involve itself in economic activity, or as little as possible. Supply and demand is a basic economic conduct where price is determined by rarity plus demand. So, if you have a lot of something and there isn't a whole lot of demand for it, you can sell it for really cheap. However, if you have very little of something and everyone wants it, you can sell it for as high as you want. Let's see. A planned economy is where the prices of products are determined by the state. A socialist economy is where the state is the central authority on all economic activity. And capitalism is privately owned businesses determining the price of products. Pretty much what we have in the United States, with a couple of exceptions. Antitrust suits encourage competition in industries, and a monopoly is when one business has total control of an industry. Fuck you, Tyson. Global trade is where international borders, or international trade, occurs across borders. Thank you, Trump, for ruining that and doing general tariffs across the board, across the world. You're fucking us. Tariffs are taxes on imports and exports, and economic resources are always limited. All right, it does not matter how much you produce. We are looking at infinite growth with finite resources, which is what causes a lot of economic issues in the United States. In fact, we always strive to increase productivity and increase gains with limited resources. Entrepreneurial ability, make business decisions. Well, yeah, I wasn't that great of a note taker, as you can see. Opportunity costs are resources that could have been used elsewhere, and fiscal policy are government allocations and collections of finances. After that, you get into extra units. Forensic science. Forensics are applying science into criminal justice. Mathieu Orfila is the author of Poison and How It Affects Humans and Animals. He wrote that in 1814. Francis Galton developed fingerprint classification in 1892, which later went on to become CODIS. Leon Laetus created blood types. Calvin Foddard created bullet matching. Edmund Locard came up with the idea that objects exchange materials when they touch each other. Testimony is statement given under oath. An expert witness are specialists who will provide expert knowledge on a given topic in court. Pathology is the study of a disease, and an autopsy is where you examine a body. Forensic pathology is based on medical examiners and coroners doing autopsies, and rigor mortis is when the muscles relax within 24 hours after death. HAD means hours after death. Livor mortis is when blood settles into the body within about 12 hours after death, and algor mortis is when the body starts to cool down 0 to 72 hours after death. Anthropology is the study of bones. Psychiatry is the study of human behavior. Entomology is the study of bugs. And odontology is the study of teeth. There's physical evidence. That's evidence that links with the crime and the criminal. There's a crime scene, a place where crime occurred. First responders are the people that arrive at the crime scene first, usually police. Overview photos involve wide angles, but intermediate photos are closer to the evidence. Also make sure that you have rulers or other measurements on your photos. That way you can use it as a reference point for how large or small an object you're taking is. Close-up photos are focus photos, obviously. Rough sketches are accurate accounts of distance between objects. And a finished sketch is a precise representation of a scene. Secondary crime scenes are other sites of criminal activity, and a chain of custody are a list of possession of evidence. Unknown samples are evidence collected at a crime scene. Known samples are evidence that comes from specific people or places. Trace evidence means small amounts of evidence, and the Fourth Amendment is protection from unreasonable search and seizure. So, when you're working in a crime lab, you need a warrant. Always need it. Doesn't matter if it's a search warrant or if it's a biological warrant where you get DNA swab, you need warrants for these things. Otherwise, it can be dismissed in a court of law, and then it becomes really tough to get a conviction. Documentary evidence is written or recorded evidence, which is becoming far more prevalent than it was, say, even 25 years ago. Demonstrative evidence is where you can recreate or illustrate a crime. And then ID determines characteristics as surely as possible. So fingerprints, blood, DNA, urine, semen, hair, all of that. Comparison is when you are testing a suspect sample with a known sample. And the probability is the frequency of an event. So if you match a fingerprint, the odds of it being not your suspects can be determined through CODIS. And these things are so accurate that the odds of it not being correct are all the way up to 1 in 500 million. So, because of the highly unlikelihood of inaccuracy with CODIS, you can get a lot of convictions if you have fingerprints or DNA. Chemical and physical properties A chemical property is a substance that reacts with other substances. Meanwhile, physical properties are things that describe an object without other substances. Radial fractures extend outward from point of impact. This is glass shatter. And then concentric fractures form a circle from the point of impact. So bullet holes mainly. Soils are surface materials from the earth, and then morphology is the study of structure. Medulla are a set of cells in hair, and nuclear DNA are the nucleus in a cell. Both parents have them. And then mitochondrial DNA is from the mitochondrion, and it only comes from your mother. The ABO is your blood type system, and Kastle-Meyer is a blood test that will turn blood pink. Hemoglobin is a protein in the blood that makes it red. And luminol is a blood test that can detect trace amounts of blood, even if it's been dried up or wiped down. Herbert McDonald was a bloodstain specialist, and he is the one that came up with... Oh, never mind. I'm a terrible note taker, as you can see. Let's see. In fingerprints, loops are a special type of fingerprint with 60 to 65% commonality. Whorls are about 30 to 35% commonality, and then you've got arches, which are right about 5 or less percent commonality. So if you've got arch fingerprints, you need to find a suspect that has arch fingerprints, because that has the most likelihood of having a match. Let's see, latent FP are oil and perspiration on the surface, and then visible FP, visible fingerprints, are visible fingerprints. No shit, Sherlock. I literally wrote that in the book. No shit, Sherlock. Visible fingerprints are visible fingerprints. Oh, you don't say. Jesus Christ. Oh, I was a little shit as an 18-year-old, as you can see. Okay. Okay, and that is it for this comp book. I remember about 85% of this. I have absolutely no recollection of that last one that I did that involved British literature. Must have been something I took in my freshman year of college, because I have literally no recollection of that at all. Here is my biology comp book, which also has my address on it. Good thing I don't live there anymore. Anyways, let's see. Good grief. The nature of science. What is science? Science is a process and body of knowledge. And a process is a procedure or a way of doing. A body of knowledge is a group or collection of information. Science is dynamic and hands-on. It changes as knowledge of the world advances. Science is like data, recorded observations, or hypothesis, a testable explanation for observations or problems. Observations is where you use one or more of the 5 senses to gather information. A recording of facts, if you will. Theories are inferred explanations and can usually be proven with demonstration, and they are based on evidence and data developed over time. A law, however, is a statement of description of relationships among observable phenomena, and there's usually a formula to explain it. For example, in Newton's first law, force equals mass times acceleration. You can literally calculate these things. That is the difference between a theory and a law. Cell theory is based on hard facts because we have cells in our body. However, Newton's first law is force. Force is the equivalent of mass times acceleration. We can calculate that. You can't really calculate the fact that cells exist. It's just a fact. That's the difference between a theory and a fact. So for those of you idiots that don't understand that theories are scientific facts that we have studied our lives to understanding, go fuck yourselves. You're the stupid ones. All right? Just because you think a theory is a hypothesis, that's your problem. All right? You don't get to make it everyone else's problem. Now, with phenomena, that is something that can be observed and studied, and that typically is unusual or difficult to understand or explain. Inferences are logical interpretations based upon prior knowledge and experience. It uses observations. Qualitative are descriptions that don't use numbers, but quality. Quantitative includes numbers or measurements. Inference is to make a guess based on observation, and prediction is to make an inference about a future event based on current evidence or past experience. And these are a bunch of old assignments. Okay, not sure why they're stuck in here, but okay. What is life? In order for something to be living, it must be composed of cells. Cells are the components of all living things. Use energy. Living organisms require energy to carry out energy requiring activities such as metabolism and locomotion. It must grow and develop. This means more than just getting larger in size. Living organisms must also have the ability to rebuild and repair itself when injured. It must respond to its environment. All living things respond to stimuli in their environment. A stimuli is something that causes a response. It must also be able to reproduce. Living things must make more of their own kind. And finally, it must die. All living things must eventually die. Okay, the chemistry of life, that mostly involves atoms and the periodic table. Here we have physical and chemical change, which in science, change is represented with a triangle. I shit you not. Look it up. Change is represented with a triangle in science. Matter can change phases temporarily or permanently. Temporary changes are called physical changes, but permanent changes are called chemical changes. Physical changes only change the phase, not the substance. Physical changes usually change the size or shape of a substance. Examples are like when you melt ice, or if you rip paper. But chemical changes create new materials. The original materials are changed into something completely different, like when firewood burns into ash, or if a car rusts. Here we have the anatomy of cells. This is an animal cell, and this is a plant cell. Primary difference between the two is that a plant cell will have a very strong cell wall, and an animal cell mostly just has a membrane. And then plant cells have chloroplasts, but animal cells don't have those for the most part. And then when it comes to the anatomy of cells, let's see. A cell is the smallest unit capable of performing life functions. It is the basic unit of living things. And this is where cell theory comes in. Cells are the basic units of life. All organisms are made of one or more cells, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. That is cell theory. All right? There is no mathematical formula to it. It's just basic human understanding that these three pillars of facts form a study that many biologists spend their entire lives dedicating their specialties to. Cell organelles are cell parts that are referred to as organelles. For example, the cell wall. It supports and protects the cell and is primarily meant for plant cells. A cell membrane is a protective layer around all cells. It allows food and oxygen into the cell and waste out of the cell. Cytoplasm is a gel-like material surrounded by the cell membrane. A nucleus is where a cell gets its instructions for everything the cell does, which includes DNA, which is the control center. Ribosomes are where each cell makes thousands of proteins found on endoplasmic reticulum and around the cell. Endoplasmic reticulum moves and processes materials around the cell. Smooth means it has no ribosomes and processes fats. Rough means it has ribosomes and processes proteins. Mitochondrions are where you release energy for food, aka the powerhouse of the cell. Chloroplasts in plants and other photosynthetic organizations will contain green chlorophyll where photosynthesis takes place. Helps plant cells make food. A vacuole are little membrane-bound temporary storage spaces, and it contains water and helps plants maintain their shape. A Golgi body are packaging plants that move material in and out of the cell. See what else we can look at here. Classification and diversity. Linnaeus developed the scientific naming system still used today. Taxonomy is the science of naming organisms. Jesus Christ. White oak is, for example, the Quercus alba. A taxon is a group of organisms, in classification systems. Classification is a tool that helps organize and identify living things. A binomial nomenclature is a two-part scientific naming system. For example, humans, Homo sapien. Two-part, binomial. It uses Latin words and scientific names always written in italics. Two parts of the genus are named... Jesus Christ. What is wrong with my 9th grade self? I took terrible notes as a freshman. Jesus Christ. A genus includes one or more physically similar species, and species in the same genus are thought to be closely related. For example, Homo sapiens. Genus name is always capitalized, and a species descriptor is the second part of a scientific name. It's always lowercase. It always follows the genus name, never written alone. Scientific names help scientists communicate. Some species have very similar common names, and some species have many common names. Linnaeus' classification system has 7 levels, and each level is included in the level above it. Levels get increasingly specific from the kingdom to species. So at the top you have the kingdom, which in Homo sapiens case is Animalia. Then you have the phylum, which is the chordata, the backbone. Humans belong to that because we have backbones. And then you have class, well, Mammalia, we are mammals after all. And then you have order, Carnivora, because we're carnivores. Family, Canidae, because wolves are canids. And then genus, Canis, species, Lupus. Wolves. Classification examples. Oh, we already went through that. Okay. There is the rare case of bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. These are domain bacteria, which includes prokaryotes in the kingdom Bacteria. It is the largest group on Earth and is classified by shape, need for oxygen, and diseases it causes. Domain Archaea includes prokaryotes in the kingdom of Archaea. The cell was chemically different from bacteria, and differences are from RNA. It's known for living in extreme environments. Domain Eukarya involves all eukaryotes, is from the kingdom Protista, kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, and kingdom Animalia. Bacteria and archaea can be different to classify, transfer genes among themselves, blurs the line between species, and more research is needed to understand prokaryotes. Dichotomous key of teenage shoes? What the fuck? Okay, this must have been an assignment that I accidentally did in my notes, because Jesus Christ. And then it just keeps going. Jesus. Okay, yeah. This just keeps going, doesn't it? Good God! Well, if you've ever wondered what putting tape over plants will do if you hold them there for 10 years, well, there's the answer. Good Lord. Ecology. A biosphere is a part of the Earth that supports life. An ecosystem is where all the organisms living in an area and the non-living factors. An abiotic factor is a non-living physical feature of the atmosphere. And water plus soil and sunlight and elevation and climate and wind. Okay. I don't know why I didn't just write down, like I said, I was a terrible note taker in high school, as you can see. Species is a group of organisms capable of breeding to produce fertile offspring. A population are all the organisms in an ecosystem of the same species. A community is where all the population in an ecosystem. And a habitat is a place where an organism lives. A limiting factor is where any living or non-living features will restrict the number of an individuals in a population. And a carrying capacity is where the largest number of individuals one species can support in an ecosystem. And then that's it. Lovely. So, that's freshman biology for you. This one is Physical Science and Chem 1. I probably abused this one the most because, wow. It's also a graphing comp book, so instead of having straight lines, you can use it to make drawings because you got vertical and horizontal grid. It also means that this is impossible to read, especially since it sustained water damage. So most of this I won't be able to read. Lovely. I also barely understand what I wrote because, again, I was a terrible note taker in freshman year. I'm not exactly sure when this happened, but yeah, this has unsustainable water damage. I can't read this. See? Like, here, here, up here. Like, I can't read this. Well, that's a shame. U.S. history. Lovely. Kind of wish I'd had that marked somewhere because there is no mark. Well, U.S. history was my favorite subject, so let's see if my note-taking here was any better. The first people migrated about 30,000 to 13,000 years ago from Asia. Migration is a movement of people from A to B. Also, we're talking specifically about the migration from Asia to the United States. We're not talking about the first ever migration, which happened in Africa over 200,000 years ago. Anyways, migration is the movement of people from point A to point B. Scientists believe that the natives got here from a land bridge from Russia to Alaska. Ice Age required nations to move. Rising sea levels, low population increase needed more land to support hunters. New technology made it easier to move, aka boats. Pros, there's no special technology needed to cross, you could just follow the animals. And the cons was that the ice blocked migration to the south until about 14,000 BC. Settlements in North America before 14,000 BC. Which leads to the boat migration theory. It's hard to prove because settlements are underwater now, and the original coastline is underwater. The pros is that there was plenty of food, boats, no barrier preventing migration. The cons was that crossing is impossible. There's no physical evidence to prove that it happened. Clovis is the first paleo of ancient Indians, and discovered in Clovis, New Mexico in 1929, hence the name Clovis. It lasted from 9,500 BC to 8,800 BC and spread across the United States. Hunter-gatherers traveled with animals and were ID'd by the tools they used: stone, wood, and animal hide. Oldest cultures are buried deepest in the ground. Clovis are oldest because their remains are deepest in the ground. Disappeared by overhunting animals and possible overpopulation. The climate change killed off the wildlife, which led to new technology, which led to better settlements. Folsom and Plano take over. The Folsom adapted from the Clovis 9,000 BC to 8,000 BC, and the Plano adapted from the Folsom 8,000 BC to about 6,000 BC. Jesus Christ, my notes suck. Okay, The Voyages of Columbus. By 1492, Europeans were expanding knowledge of the world, and Portugal has Prince Henry the Navigator. Bartholomew Diaz and Vasco da Gama proved India could be reached by sailing around Africa. However, they still thought the world was much smaller than it actually was. They believed that there was only one ocean, and they only knew about Europe, Asia, and Africa. They wanted spices to preserve and give taste to food. Silk and gold were sought after too. Portugal avoided the Ottoman tax by sailing to India instead. Columbus was born as a voyager and learned how to navigate as a child by voyaging to Africa. He wanted to sail west to India. He failed to find anyone willing to back him financially. He believed that sailing west would lead him straight to China and Japan. Earth was actually bigger than he expected. He convinced Spain to fund his voyage, and Spain loved the idea sailed the Bahamas, sailed to Cuba, landed in Haiti. Friendly encounter, left with natives, left his men to settle La Navidad. Brought gold, spices, plants, animals, and slaves. 1493 gets another voyage of 17 ships this time, conquers the land, acquires more wealth, and evangelizes the natives. First, find the gold. He finds a settlement destroyed and his men killed. This causes him to use natives as a workforce. Columbus later forced natives to become Christians. Christian priests spoke against native enslavement. Columbus left his third voyage to find Asia, discovered South America instead, lost his honors from treating natives so harshly in Hispaniola. Columbus set sail on his fourth voyage in 1502, explored more of South America, and never found Asia. English exploration. In 1497, England sends John Cabot to explore the New World. Richard Hakluyt was a writer who encouraged settlement. Colonies can help spread Christianity, spread England's influence, and offer land ownership to the poor. By 1500s, England sets Sir Drake to explore the world. Sir Raleigh leads a colonial effort to Virginia in 1585 to 1587. He failed at Roanoke, and the colony completely disappeared. Colonization efforts continue in 1606. King James I. Virginia Charter Company would govern the colony, and the company would try to make a profit. Establish colonies and claim them for Great Britain. John Smith takes over Jamestown by 1608, wanted profit. Once John Smith left Jamestown, hard times returned. 1610 became a starving time. Many colonists died. John Rolfe arrived after 1610, planted tobacco, was killed after Pocahontas died from smallpox. Tobacco became very profitable in Virginia. House of Burgesses was the first representative government based on an English government and involved a governor. Natives have had enough. Conduct Jamestown massacre. Hundreds die. Colonists kill hundreds of natives in retaliation. Due to this, King James makes Virginia a royal colony, and Burgesses established in 1619, first colonial government. French and Dutch exploration. Henry Hudson tried to find the Northwest Passage, claimed a lot of land for the Dutch. Giovanni de Verranzo was an Italian explorer for France, explored present-day New York, thought he found the Pacific Ocean. Jacques Cartier was a French explorer, set up the French colonies, far and wide, Canada and west of the Mississippi. Due to climate, France abandons exploration for 60 years. Samuel Champlain makes alliance with natives to trade. France decides to set up colonies for trapping. King Louis provided protection and incentive for New France. Population doubles in 10 years. Jacques Norcourt explores the Mississippi, claims it. Robert La Salle discovers Louisiana, claims it. Dutch set up New Netherlands, taken over by the English. New Amsterdam bought for $24, now worth several billion. Explorers and native. Get the fuck on with it. The New England colonies already knew everything. William Bradford, leader of the Pilgrims, governed Plymouth. John Winthrop was the leader of the Puritans, founded Boston. Roger Williams questioned the Puritan government and fled, while he established Rhode Island, separation of church and state. Yes, he believed that the Puritans should not base their entire government around their religion, and he got exiled for that. And that was the founding principle of separation of church and state. Anne Hutchinson was crazy. He criticized the Puritans and got banished to Rhode Island. The southern colonies were a House of Burgesses influence, the modern-day Senate. Bacon's rebellion had dire consequences. Bacon hanged for taking the law in his own hands in 1712. North Carolina and South Carolina split. The middle colonies. Lord Baltimore was a Catholic, persecuted in Britain, and established the state of Maryland, which was named after Queen Mary. Proprietorship was land given in exchange for a share in profit. Lord Baltimore and William Penn became proprietors. William Penn was the founder of the Quakers. He was a pacifist, and he granted Pennsylvania to pay a debt. Penn has 8,000 Quakers leave for Pennsylvania by 1685. Quakers believed in cooperation, promoted treaties to buy land. Peter Minois bought New York City for $24 and founded Delaware. Peter Stuyvesant was the New Netherlands, did bad and good. Duke of York seized New Netherlands, renamed it New York. Let's see. Tax and protests. In 1765, Patrick Henry opposed the Stamp Act, believed that the colony should have a say on their taxation. Samuel Adams led the Stamp Act protests in Boston. The Sons of Liberty were a group of protesters that led to rebellion. The Stamp Act was repealed after 1766. Declaratory Act was a parliament declared that Parliament has a right to tax the colonists. The Townshend Acts taxed all imports, forced colonists to pay them. Direct threat to colonial self-rule led to Boston Tea Party, Boston Massacre. This is where soldiers refused to leave Boston, which led to fighting breaking out. Soldiers opened fire, and 5 men were killed. John Adams defended the soldiers in a court of law. Most of them were set free, however, a couple did get branded. Colonial resistance. The Tea Act was passed in 1773. The colonists were infuriated. Boston Tea Party was meant to protest the fact that Parliament passes the Intolerable Acts. Boston Harbor was closed and limited the courts. Made the colonists form the first Continental Congress. Okay. As you can see, my note-taking is god-awful. Here we have sociology. Sociology is a social science that studies human society. Social science studies human social behavior in scientific manners. Social interaction is how people relate to one another. Social phenomena are observable facts that evolve human society. Why study sociology? Gain perspective of the world, see the connection between the larger world and the personal life. Sociological image is the concept of why we study sociology, and it was developed by C. Wright Mills. American Sociological Association was developed in 1905, shares new research and ideas, brings together information on sociology, criminology, theory, and medical criminology. Anthropology is a group behavior in advanced societies, studies cultural traits of neighbors and neighborhoods in urban areas. Psychology is a focus on an individual. Meanwhile, social psychology is a focus on the environment and its effects on human behavior and its personality. Economics is a group of economic factors, political, science, voting patterns, and political groups, also grouped in history. Social historian is the study of past events and its effect on current social behaviors and attitudes. What dating patterns exist today in teens, or what effect of the Great Depression have on families? Sociology then and now. American value system, social control, cultural variation, social change, resistance, social structure, types of social interaction, types of societies, groups within society, structure of formal organizations, personality development, social self, George Mead on role taking, agents of socialization, adolescence in society, teenagers and dating, why date, challenges of adolescence, early and middle adulthood, world of work, the later years, deviance, crime, systems of stratification, the American class system, poverty, race, ethnicity, and social structure, patterns of intergroup relations, minorities, gender, age and disability, health, family, cross-cultured perspective, the American family, economic institutions, political institution, education, sociology and religion, sociology of science, mass media as a social institution, population change, urban life, collective behavior, social movements, explaining social change, evolutionary theory, modernization, systems of stratification, American class system, poverty, race, ethnicity, social structure, intergroup relations, minorities, health, family, cross-culture, American family, and economic institution. I have a feeling that I wrote some of these notes twice or did a refresher because I could have sworn that I did some of those twice. Anyways, English 3, which, wow, I took no notes for English 3. That is hilarious. What's this textbook? Another unmarked textbook. Lovely. Oh, yep, and there's my old address again. Jesus Christ. Oh. This isn't a notebook, it's a planner. Okay, Algebra 2. Okay, here we go. Key. Capital Q is rational, capital N is natural, capital W is whole, capital Z it equals integers, capital Q with a apostrophe is irrational, and capital R equals real. Natural numbers are used for counting, starting with 1. Whole numbers are natural numbers along with 0. Integers are positive and negative whole numbers. And rational numbers are numbers that can be written as a fraction. Irrational numbers cannot be written as a fraction. And real numbers are all rational and irrational numbers. A real number plus a real number equals a real number. Real numbers are closed under addition. And whole numbers are only used by addition and multiplication. Identity property addition is where you add 0 to any real number, will not change the original number. For example, a plus 0 equals a. Identity property multiplication is when you multiply any real number by 1. It does not change the original number. So a times 1 equals a. Distributive property is where a plus bc equals a times b plus a plus c. For example, 3x minus 4 is 3x equals negative 12, which means that x equals negative 4. Inequalities are where two real numbers, x and y, can only have one relationship. X is less than y, or x is more than y, or x is equal to y. So if x equals negative 4 and y equals negative 3 halves, then x is greater or less than y. A solution set of an inequality is where all numbers that make the inequality true is 3 in the solution set of the inequality. So x plus 1 is less than 4, 3 plus 1 is less than 4, 4 is less than 4x, therefore there is no solution. Jesus Christ. Now I can see why I wasn't good at math. Compound inequalities are two inequalities joined by or and. X is less than 5 or x is more than 11. A solution must satisfy at least one of the inequalities. Negative 2 and 19 can satisfy the inequality, but 8 cannot for the original equation. X is greater than or equal to 1, and x is less than 7. Both inequalities must be satisfied by a solution. 5 is a solution, but 0 is not. Therefore, 1 is less than or equal to x, which is less than 7. Okay. Holy shit. Relations and functions. A relation is a set of ordered pairs. A domain is a set of first elements. A range is a set of second elements. A relation is an ordered pair, x, y. A representation is an equation, word, graph, tablet, etc. A domain is a set of x values, and a range is a set of y values. Function is a relation in which each element is paired with one element in the range. So, for example, a non-function would be minus 6 to 1, minus 3 to minus 7 equals 4, therefore 1 equals 3. Well, that's not a function. However, get this. Negative 1 to negative 3, 0 to negative 1, 1, 2, 1 is a function. I'm not gonna lie to you, I have no idea what the fuck I wrote. Let's go with the equation y equals x squared minus 1. A function notation would turn that into f of x equals x squared minus 1. Evaluation functions means that, let's plug in minus 2. F of minus 2 equals negative 2 squared minus 1 equals 3. So your function would now be negative 2, 3, which is an ordered pair of f. In the graphs, all points would be x, f of x. And the table columns would be f, x, and f of x. Tickets cost $15 each. Write a function for the cost of x ticket. Input x, independent. Output, cost x, dependent. Relationship $15 per ticket. Cost of x equals 15x. F of x, 3 squared, or 3 times 2 squared minus 4. F of x equals 12 minus 4. Therefore, f of x equals 8. Jesus Christ. Yeah, I mean, I'm writing a bunch of graphs that I have no idea what the fuck I'm writing. Yeah, like none of this stuck with me. I specifically took this class just so I wouldn't have to go to dumb math. Like my sister did because she's a dumbass. Okay. And again, if I wrote all this down and I have no idea what I did to write it down, would that make me a dumbass as well? Yes, but it would make me a far more competent one. Oh, that's nice. If I remember correctly, I decided to do an entire week's worth of NFL games predicting how each one would turn out, who would win, and the score. The outcome was that I got 31 out of 45 games correctly, which was 69% accuracy. Nice. The margin, however, was that I got 22 out of 45 right, which is 49% accuracy, and I only had 3 spot-on predictions. And then, when it came to the playoffs that year, if I can remember correctly, in the AFC playoffs, you had the Pats, Steelers, Jags, Chiefs, Ravens, and Chargers. This was prior to the additional wild card. And then in the NFC playoffs, you had Eagles, Vikings, Rams, Saints, Panthers, and Falcons. In the divisional, the Patriots defeated the Jags 35-24. The Chiefs defeated the Steelers 24-21 in overtime. And then in the AFC Championship, the Patriots defeated the Chiefs 31-21. And then in the divisional for the NFC, the Rams defeated the Eagles 31-20. The Vikings defeated the Saints 34-24. And then in the championship, the Rams defeated the Vikings 26-13, which led to a Super Bowl 52 of Pats versus Rams. Huh. Okay, so I had a very cynical outlook on this year. And I did get the Super Bowl correctly. I did guess that correctly. I didn't get any of the scores right, but I got most of the predictions right. Where I failed would have been the Saints actually beat the Vikings. And then wow. I genuinely don't remember making this, but I did correctly guess the Super Bowl champion that year. So, okay, if I remember correctly, this was my senior folder that I used to keep track of all my shit. And as you can see, I did a wonderful job at that, just writing it down on the folder itself. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Okay, curriculum, graduation ceremony, a couple of bank statements for some reason, textbook key, ebook, another ebook, and personal file. Okay, so let's put that away. There's nothing to learn out of that. Okay, let's look at geometry, which also took a fucking beating. Jesus Christ. Like, it doesn't even have a back or anything. And the spine is all sorts out of whack. Okay. Okay. Economics deals with production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Each characteristic relies on choices that are made. Choices are a complex process, and consumers have a lot of impact on businesses, factories, banking, etc., because they have the power of choosing what to buy and what not to. Needs are things you can't live without. Wants are things you want to have but can live without. And goals are things you want to accomplish in life. Scarcity are a basic economic problem that resources are limited, but the want for them is not. The more scarce, the more valuable. Choosing the one thing forces us to give up something else. The opportunity cost of a choice is what is given up. Next best alternative. A need is water, a want is candy, and a goal is to raise $1,000. An opportunity cost means that you give up Snickers for water damage. Once again, I can't read half of this shit. Never mind that. Opportunity cost is what's lost in a choice. Supply are items that are able and willing to be supplied, and demand are items that are able and willing to buy. Corporate combinations are the most common method of combining with mergers. Mergers is one company joining with another, and an absorbed company loses its identity. To grow, corporations can combine the worth of other enterprises. There's horizontal, vertical, and conglomerate integration. In horizontal integration, a merger with two or more companies that produce the same good or service. This is how Rockefeller completely horizontally integrated the steamboat industry, or the oil industry. My mistake with General Oil. Vertical integration is when you merge with two companies involved in different productions of the same good or service. For example, Tyson. They are known for that, where they will control every single part of the process. Conglomerate combination is when a merger of companies produces unrelated project. For example, Gillette has a conglomerate of the dental, toiletry, battery, razor, and appliance industries. There are advantages and disadvantages. Advantages would be that this is efficient, it lowers costs, and it's easier to get capital. However, this also causes unemployment and reduces competition. A franchise is a business that pays another business to use their name and product line with the same business. Like, for example, hotels, chains, car rentals, or fast food. A parent company is a franchisor, and the owner of a franchise is a franchisee. The advantages is that you get a low startup cost, it's a recognizable name and product, and it has widespread advertising. But a disadvantage is that it's restricted by the parent company and you have to pay royalties. Stocks, buy, sell, stock exchange, NASDAQ. Applications, interviews, banking, overdraw, fees, electronic banking, ATMs, direct deposit, automatic payment, automatic withdrawal, EFTA Act, wire transfers, money market account, annual percentage yield, bonds, Federal Reserve, series, investment formula, types of stocks, research investments, buying and leasing, money factor. Okay, here's the good shit. Geometry, my least favorite subject of them all. You got the midpoint formula, distance formula, vertical angles, similar polygons, scale factor, inductive reasoning is where you use previous examples to form a pattern. Conjecture is a conclusion from previous examples. And a counterexample is a false example that disproves conjectures. For example, the statement, any sentence that's true or false. A truth value is truth or false, the truth or falsity of a statement. Negation are changes the truth value of a statement. And a compound statement are two or more statements joined by or and. Conjunction is a compound statement using and a disjunction is a compound statement using or. Conditional statement are if-then statements. Hypothesis is an if portion, and a conclusion is a then portion. A converse is a conditional made by switching the hypothesis and conclusion of a conditional statement. An inverse negates the hypothesis and conclusion, and a contrapositive negates the hypothesis and conclusion of the converse. Biconditional are the if and only then statements, and the statement is converse only if it's true. A 32-ounce pitcher holds a quart of liquid. If a pitcher holds 32 ounces of liquid, then it holds a quart. Okay, good. Deductive reasons are facts, rules, definitions, or properties to reach logical conclusions. Inductive reasons are patterns of examples to reach logical conclusions. Okay. Volume is an amount of space inside an object. A cone is a circular base that has a curved surface that will make a point. A sphere is a set of all points the same distance from a given point. Surface area is the area of all faces of a base. A prism is two congruent bases and parallelogram faces. A pyramid has polygon bases, triangular faces that meet at a point. A cylinder are two parallel congruent circular and is connected by a curved surface. A convex polygon is an extended side. Do not go through the polygon. A perimeter circumference is the distance around the outside. Area is where square units inside a figure. Perpendicular are two things that form right angles. Polygons are closed figures with straight sides, and the sides don't intersect except at the vertices. A concave polygon is an extended side that goes through the polygon. It caves in. A linear pair are a pair of adjacent angles with uncommon sides that are opposite rays. A vertical angle are two non-adjacent angles formed by two intersecting lines. And then supplementary angles are two angles that add to be 180 degrees, which is a straight line. A line segment is when a part of a line with two end points. For example, if this is point L and this is point M, then your line segment is LM. Congruent segments are two line segments that are the same size. Irrational numbers are numbers that never end and don't repeat. For example, the square root of 17. A collinear are two or more parts of the same line. A coplanar are two or more points on the same plane. An intersection are where two things meet at all common points. Opposite rays are rays with a common endpoint that go in opposite directions and form a line. An angle are two rays with a common endpoint. Sides and vertex are the side ray of an angle. Vertex is the endpoint of an angle. A midpoint is a point in the middle of a line segment. A segment bisector is a segment, line, or plane that divides a segment in half. A ray is a part of a line with one endpoint. An angle bisector is a ray that divides an angle in half. An adjacent angle are two angles that lie on the same plane. It's a common vertex and side, but no common interior points. Complementary angles are two angles that add to be 90 degrees. An interior are points inside of an angle. An exterior are points outside of an angle. A degree is a unit of measurement for angles. 1 degree is 1/360th of a circle. Skew lines are two lines that never intersect and are not in the same plane. Alternate exterior angles are outside the lines opposite sides of a transversal one on top of one or the other. So angles 2 and 7 in this chart would be a consecutive interior angle. A transversal is a line that intersects two or more lines at different points. Corresponding angles are the same position, same side of a transversal, above or below the lines. Alternate interior angles are inside the lines opposite sides of the transversal, one on top and the other on bottom. Altitude, in terms of a triangle, is a segment from a vertex angle to the line that contains the opposite side. An orthocenter is part of the concurrency of the altitudes of a triangle. An incenter is a point of concurrency of the absector of a triangle. A median is a segment that connects a vertex to the midpoint of the opposite side. A centroid is the point of concurrency of the medians of a triangle. Concurrent lines are three or more lines that intersect at the same point. Point of concurrency is a point of intersection of concurrent lines. Circumcenter is a part of a concurrency of the angle bisectors of a triangle. A midsegment is a segment that connects the midpoint at two sides of a triangle. An altitude, in terms of a triangle, is the height of a triangle perpendicular to a side. Median, in the terms of a triangle, are a segment that connects a midpoint of a side to the opposite vertex. A rhombus is a parallelogram with four equal sides. A square is a parallelogram with four equal sides and four right angles. Here are some postulates for you. If two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles of another triangle, then they are similar. Through any 2 points, there is one line. Through any three non-collinear joints, there is exactly one plane. A line contains at least 2 points. A plane contains at least 3 non-collinear points. If 2 points lie on a plane, then the line containing those 2 points lie on the same plane. If 2 lines intersect, that intersection is exactly 1 point. If 2 planes intersect, then their intersection is a line. If B is in between A plus C, then AB plus BC equals AC. If AB plus BC equals AC, then B is between A plus C. If R is in the interior of, Jesus Christ, I don't even know what angle addition postulate is that postulate. If the sides of the triangle are equal to the sides of a second triangle, then the triangles are side-side congruent. Oh, that's what congruent means. Okay, never mind. See? Idiot. Certified idiot, right here. If 2 sides and the included angle of the triangle are congruent to 2 sides and the included angle of the second triangle, then they are congruent. Can you believe that I equated congruent to equal? Jesus Christ, I'm an idiot. Okay. If 2 angles and the included side of the one triangle are congruent to 2 angles and the included side of a second triangle, then they are congruent. The measures of an arc formed by 2 adjacent areas in the sum of the measures of the 2 areas. Now let's go through some theorems and corollaries. Congruent triangles have corresponding angle bisectors proportional to corresponding sides. Congruent triangles have corresponding medians proportional to corresponding sides. Angle bisectors in a triangle separates the opposite side into segments that have the same ratio as the other 2 sides. If M is the midpoint of AB, then AM is congruent to MB. That's called the midpoint theorem. If 2 angles form a linear pair, then they are supplementary. If the non-common sides of 2 adjacent angles form a right triangle, then the angles are complementary. Reflexive property, symmetric property, transitive property, angles supplementary to the same angle or congruent angles are congruent. Angles complementary to the same angle or congruent angles are congruent. Vertical angles are congruent. Parallel lines intersect to form right angles. All right angles are congruent. Parallel lines form congruent adjacent angles. If angles are congruent, if 2 angles are congruent and supplementary, each angle is a right angle. If two angles form a linear pair, they are right angles. The sum of the measures of angles of a triangle is 180 degrees. The measure of an exterior angle of a triangle is equal to the sum of the remote interior angles. The acute angles of a right triangle are complementary. There can be at most one right or obtuse angle in a triangle. If two angles of one triangle are congruent to two angles in a second triangle, then the third angles are congruent. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Triangle congruence theorem, angle side theorem. If two angles and a non-included side of one triangle are congruent to the corresponding angles and side of a second triangle, then they are congruent. If two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides are congruent. If two angles of a triangle are congruent, then the sides opposite those angles are congruent. A triangle is equilateral if and only if it is equiangular. Each angle of an equilatory triangle measures 60 degrees. The sum of the lengths of any two sides of a triangle must be greater than the length of a third side. If two sides of a triangle are congruent to two sides of another triangle and the included angle of the first triangle is greater than the included angle of the second triangle, then the third side of the first triangle is longer than the third side of the second triangle. If a point is on the parallel bisector of a segment, then it is equidistant from the endpoints of the segment. If a point is equidistant from the endpoints of a segment, then it is perpendicular bisector of the segment. The perpendicular bisectors of a triangle intersect at the point called the circumcenter that is equidistant from the vertices of the triangle. If a point is on the bisector of an angle, then it is equidistant from the sides of the angle. If a point in the interior of an angle is equidistant from the sides of the angle, then it is on the bisector of the angle. The angle bisectors of a triangle intersect at a point called the incenter that is equidistant from the sides of the triangle. The medians of a triangle intersect at a point called the centroid that is 2/3 the distance from each vertex to the I can't remember what that's called, of the opposite side. The measure of an exterior angle of a triangle is greater than the measure of either of its corresponding remote interior angles. If one side of a triangle is longer than the other side, then the angle opposite the longer side has a greater measure than the angle opposite the shorter side. If one angle of a triangle has a greater measure than another angle, then the opposite side of a greater angle is longer than the opposite side of the lesser triangle. Consecutive angles in a parallelogram are supplementary. If a parallelogram has one right angle, it has four right angles. The diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Each diagonal of a parallelogram separates the parallelogram into two congruent triangles. If both pairs of opposite sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, then the figure is a parallelogram. Now here's a good one. If two sides of a triangle are congruent to two sides of another triangle, and the third side in the first triangle is longer than the third side of the second triangle, then the included angle measure of the first triangle is greater than the mass of the included angle measure in the second triangle. If a convex polygon has n sides and s is the sum of the measures, its interior angles, then its s equals 180. N minus 2. If a polygon is convex, then the sum of its measures of the exterior angles, one at each vertex, is 360 degrees. Opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. Diagonals of a rhombus are parallel. Each diagonal of a rhombus bisects a pair of opposite angles. Diagonals of a parallelogram are parallel. Then, The parallelogram is a rhombus. If one diagonal of a parallelogram bisects a pair of opposite angles, then the parallelogram is a rhombus. If one pair of consecutive sides of a parallelogram are congruent, then the parallelogram is a rhombus. If both pairs of the opposite angles in a quadrilateral are congruent, then the figure is a quadrilateral. If the diagonals of a quadrilateral bisect each other, then the figure is a parallelogram. If one pair of opposite sides of a quadrilateral is both parallel and congruent, then the figure is a parallelogram. If a parallelogram is a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent. If the diagonals of a parallelogram are congruent, then the parallelogram is a rectangle. If a quad is both a rectangle and a rhombus, then it's a square. If a trapezoid is isosceles, then each pair of base angles is congruent. If a trapezoid has one pair of congruent base angles, then it is an isosceles trapezoid. A trapezoid is isosceles if and only if its diagonals are congruent. Median of a trapezoid is congruent to the bases, and its measure is half the sum of the measures of the bases. If a quad is a kite, then its diagonals are parallel. If a quad is a kite, then one pair of opposite angles is congruent. If the altitude is drawn to the hypotenuse of a right triangle, then the two triangles formed are similar to the original triangle and each other. The altitude drawn to the hypotenuse of a right triangle separates the hypotenuse into two segments. Length of this altitude is the geometric mean between the lengths of the two segments. Jesus. The altitude drawn into the hypotenuse of a right triangle separates the hypotenuse into two segments. Length of a leg of this triangle is the geometric mean between the length of the hypotenuse and the segment of the hypotenuse and adjacent to that leg. Good God. If a line intersects two sides of a triangle and separates sides into proportional corresponding segments, the line is parallel to the third side. A mid-segment of a triangle is parallel to one side of the triangle, half the length of that side. If three or more parallel lines intersect two transversals, then they cut off the transversals proportionally. If three or more parallel lines cut off the congruent segments on one transversal, then they are out of congruent segments on every transversal. Similar triangles have corresponding alternate proportional to corresponding sides. If two polygons are similar, then their perimeters are proportional to the scale factor between them. If the corresponding side lengths of two triangles are proportional, they are similar. If the lengths of two sides of one triangle are proportional to the lengths of two corresponding sides of another triangle and the concluded angles are congruent, the triangles are similar. Reflexive triangle. ABC is similar to triangle ABC. Symmetric. Triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEF. Then DEF is similar to ABC. Transitive. If triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEF plus triangle DEF is similar to triangle XYZ, then ABC is similar to XYZ. If a line is parallel to one side of a triangle and intersects the other two sides, then it divides the sides into segments of proportional lengths. In a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the length of the hypotenuse is twice the length of a shorter leg, and the length of the longer leg is rad 3 times the length of a shorter leg. The composition of two or more isometrics is an isometry. The composition of two reflections in parallel lines can be described by a translation vector that is parallel to the two lines and twice the distance between the two lines. Good Lord. The composition of two reflections in intersecting lines can be described by a rotation. point where the lines intersect and through the angle that is twice the measure of the acute or right angle formed by the lines. In the same or congruent circles, two arcs are congruent if and only if their corresponding central angles are... Jesus Christ. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. This only works for right triangles. If the sum of the squares of the measures of the two sides of a triangle equals the square of the third side, then the triangle is a right triangle. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. If the square of both the longest side of the triangle is less than the sum of the square of the lengths of the outer two sides, then the triangle is acute. A squared plus b squared has to be more than c squared. And if that, then the triangle is obtuse. In a 45-45-90 triangle, the legs are congruent and the length of the hypotenuse is times the length of a leg. If two inscribed angles of a circle intercept congruent areas or the same arc, then the angles are congruent. Jesus Christ. If an inscribed angle intercepts a semicircle, the angle is a right angle. If a quad is inscribed in a circle, then its opposing angles are supplementary. A line tangent to a circle, if and only if it is parallel to a radius drawn to the point of tangency. If two segments form the same exterior point are tangent to a circle, then they are congruent. In a circle, or congruent circles, two minor arcs are congruent if and only if their corresponding chords are congruent. In a circle, if a diameter or radius is parallel to a chord, then it bisects the chord and its arc. The parallel bisector of a chord is a diameter or radius of a circle. In a circle, or congruent circle, two chords are congruent if and only if they are equidistant from the center. If an angle is inscribed in a circle, then the measure of the circle is half the measure of its intercepted arc. If two secants intersect on the interior of a circle, then the measurements of an angle formed in is half the sum of the measure of the arcs intercepted by the angle and its vertical angle. If a secant and tangent intersect at the point of tangency, then the measure of each angle is half the measure of its intercepted arc. If two secants, one of each, or two tangents intersect outside the circle, then the measure of the angle is half the positive difference of the measures of the intercepted arcs. If two chords intersect in a circle, then the measures of the segments of the chords are equal. If two secant segments are drawn to a circle from an exterior point, then the product of the measures of one secant segment and its external secant segment is equal to the product of the measures of the other secant segment and its external secant segment. Finally, the last goddamn one. If a tangent segment intersect at an exterior point, then the square of the measure of the tangent segment is equal to the product of the measures of the secant segment and its external secant segment. Holy goddamn shit. Okay, so that's your theorems and corollaries. Now let's go to the factoring chart, which I am not going to read because Jesus Christ, I don't understand this shit. there anything on this side? World history. Lovely. Historians know little about the Dark Ages, because most of the documents were destroyed. The Middle Ages is the age of feudalism. There was one church, the Catholic Church, and the Roman Catholic Church will be the focus. There was also the Eastern Orthodox Church, but that was more towards Russia. Catholics and Muslims did not have good relationships. Catholics were intolerant of Muslims, and what the church said was considered the law. In terms of art, Gothic style became very popular, and windows, stained glasses, cathedrals were usually lavish. Catholics had all the money, came from the people, thanks to tithing, and books and art were all religious-based. Heresy were beliefs that opposed the teachings of the church, and inquisitions were legal procedures with judges. The power of the church, well, there was the Pope, there were cardinals, and there were archbishops, bishops, priests, and then parish. Feudalism versus monarchism. Mannerism, my bad. There was a king, then nobles, then knights, then peasants, then merchants who didn't fit anywhere. Case of the Black Death, fought the Crusades, exploration, carried animals, germs, and disease. The Black Death itself involved splotches, high fever, vomiting, headaches, and you died within a couple days. Those who tended the sick caught it easier, and they accidentally spread the plague by trying to eradicate cats. A third of the population died, and it was thought as God punishing them. Many turned to witchcraft, and anti-Semitism grew, hate for Jews. Manorialism declines. Peasants demand higher wages since their work is more valuable, and others moved to cities. Now we enter the Renaissance era, where the Black Death had a major role. Population declination had to cheaper food and land and more money to spend. Rise of city-states. Italy divided into city-states. Catholics still dominate everything. However, nobles and merchants dominated city-states. The wealthy would show off their wealth, which led to a lot of rivalries. The Renaissance was the rebirth of art, literature, and science. Along with goods, ships carried Greek scholars, brought work that most thought were lost. A thirst for knowledge meant that many would learn Arabic, Roman, and Greek. There was a belief in human creativity, and achievement grew, which led to the belief of humanism. This was a desire for education, grammar, poetry, history, Latin, and Greek. The church taught that individuality and achievement is unimportant. Humanism taught otherwise. Started to write languages that were not just Latin. Rediscovery of biology, astronomy, and medicine. Writers, because of prior wars and plague, church no longer thought sensible. Writing became more secular rather than religious. Humanists wanted achievement, education, and talents. Universal men could do it all. Baldassare Castiglione developed the idea of how to act. Serious and humorous, Latin and Greek, no history and poetry. Niccolo Machiavelli wrote The Prince. Wrote about government, rulers should have supreme power. End justifies the means, first of modern history, and government's new roles. In terms of science, as people read scientific texts, discovered science, challenged the church. Earth, not center of the world. Earth orbits sun. Prior to Renaissance, artists worked for church. New people saw art. Artists started creating three-dimensional structures. Themes still religious, but still added Roman myth. Buildings reflected Greek and Roman architecture. By the 1500s, most of Europe had big cities. Trade meant the movement of artists, trade network created, Hanseatic League protected members like a mafia, but also built infrastructure. Artists fled north from Italy. Italians would fight all the time. Scholars would flee north. The printing press was invented by Johann Gutenberg, first way to copy. Made books cheap, education for poorer people. And then Sir Thomas More wrote Utopia, criticized by the English. William Shakespeare was a poet inspired by Roman texts, expressed Renaissance through plays and realistic characters, and was available for anyone. Christine de Pizan wrote The City of Women, wanted women to be educated, not just objects. Adapted Italian ideas. North was more realistic. Holy Roman Emperor equals Pope. Catholicism in the 1400s was very powerful and wealthy. It became extravagant and worldly. People thought it went too far. Protestant Reformation was a religious movement in the 1500s that split the Catholic Church in Europe, making new choices for religious. Dissatisfaction. The church grew corrupt and immoral. They could buy indulgences, which were pardons that were issued by the Pope to reduce time in purgatory. And nationalism was loyalty to a country instead of a church. There were two major reformers, John Wycliffe, who believed the church should give up worldly possessions and removed with teaching, and John Huss, who believed the church was immoral, tried for heresy, and burned at the stake. There was Martin Luther, who was given credit for jump-starting the Protestant Reformation. And, let's see, the teachings of Christ were not intended for the public, therefore it was written in academic Latin. He followed normal procedure as church doors were bulletins, and it spread, stimulated discussions in universities. The printing press meant that work could be translated and spread quickly. Indulgences were sinful and didn't admit sin. God's grace can't be won by good works. Only head of church was Jesus, no pope needed. People can interpret the Bible, no priest needed. Christian practices come only from the Bible. Luther got expelled from the church for these beliefs, and he appeared before the new pope and other groups. He didn't change his opinion, and the pope handed down the Edict of Worms, which declared Luther as an outlaw and condemned his writings. Luther creates new church, called the Protestant Church. Came from Germany. Charles V tried to get rid of the Lutherans. Lutherans princes issued a protestative. No idea. Ulrich Zwingli was from Switzerland. He was similar to Martin Luther. He established theocracy, where a church and state are one and the same. Luther said he was tampering the word of God. Swiss Protestants, vulnerable by Catholics, killed in a battle with Catholics. John Calvin was the predestination. He believed that God knows who will be saved. Calvinism took root in Switzerland and viewed people as sinful by nature. Church was mandatory. Laws for food and clothes, amusements forbade. Appealing way of life, set good examples for others. John Knox invented Presbyterian Church. Anabaptism meant that adults could be baptized, considered a crime. Amish and Mennonites inspired by John Knox. King Henry VIII was a devout Catholic, wanted a son, but Catherine got a girl, Mary. Wanted marriage annulled, declared invalid, Pope said no. The king's great matter falls in love with Anne Boleyn. Summons Parliament, England cannot control Pope and the Catholic Church. Henry VIII is head of the Church of England, aka the Anglican Church. Marries Anne of Boleyn, declares marriage void, and Boleyn gives birth to Elizabeth. Parliament passes Act of Supremacy. Henry's head of Anglican Church. Henry had 6 wives. Edward VI took throne at 9 and died at 16, making Mary the new queen. Bloody Mary has hundreds of Protestants burned, returns England to Catholic. Elizabeth I restores Protestantism, fears Catholics, persecutes them. Counter-Reformation. Catholics were upset about church's actions, worked to reform church. Counter-Reformation, series of reforms within the Catholic Church. Ignatius of Loyola created the Jesuits, ran like a military, obedient. Best way to counter Protestant Reformation was through education, focused on being spiritual while also being active in the world. The Council of Trent were convened by the Pope for 18 years. Criticisms were made by Protestants, clarified the Church's teachings, addressed corrupt clergy, trained priests, canceled indulgences, rejected Protestant beliefs of individual faith. Church should help believers achieve salvation. Council of Trent, can't be Protestant or Catholic. Bold actions, renewed energy of Catholics. Jesuits built colleges and sent missions in Asia. Nuns, women who lived in secluded convents. After Reformation, acceptable to help the poor and orphaned and sick and teach. Jesus' teachings after convincing. The Inquisition was a court established by the Catholic Church, fights Protestants accused of witchcraft or heresy. The Spanish government created a harsher one, imposed religious conformity, forced conversions, list of books that would make you lose your soul. The guilty were tortured and executed. Inquisition damaged church's reputation. Because of Jesuits, Catholicism spreads more and more Protestants born. Religious turmoil increased as Catholics and non-Catholics fight. People didn't get along in Protestantism. The most disliked were Jews, Muslims, and atheists. Spain was a convert or leave, moved to the East and South Europe, forced them to live in ghettos. Suspicious of witches during hard times, additional hysteria. Political effects meant that people were more nationalistic, wanted churches less involved in politics. Separation of church and state became a radical idea, and church and state allied if more influence were needed. The Italian Wars, France and Spain vie for control of Italian peninsula. Rome was sucked in, took Renaissance ideas from Italy. Germanic regions, the Peasants' War, peasants stormed castles and monasteries because of high taxes and lack of freedom. Martin Luther denounces it. If he supported it, more equality would have happened. Pope Charles V now attacks region. In peace agreement, local princes get to decide what the people practice. Christopher Columbus was trying to prove the earth was flat. Reality, he was trying to prove he could sail around the world and get to Asia. Because of the Renaissance, exploration, discovery, innovation, wanted to find new land routes, money or knowledge, search for wealth, trade, and goods from China and India. Italy reaped benefits because of location. Solution, find new routes that bypass Italy. Fame, glory, curiosity, country, or God. Faith, spread the word of God. People saw it as a chance to introduce new people to God. Curiosity, Marco Polo. People wanted to find exotic lands and people. Technology helps. European and Asian technology needed a way of calculating locations. Compasses and astrolabes. Caravels rode lower in water, withstood high waves, and holds cargo. Good Lord above. Giovanni di Verrazzano, Ferdinand Magellan, Henry the Navigator, Jacques Cartier, Henry Hudson, Vasco da Gama, Vasco Nunes de Balboa, Amerigo Vespucci, Bartholomew Diaz, Pedro Cabal, John Cabot, Treasury of Tordesillas, French, Dutch, English, bunch of conquests, the British and French, Columbian exchange, mercantilism, balance of trade, capitalism, joint stocks, slavery, the Ottomans, the Turks, the Timberlane, or Timur the Lame, Mohammed II, Sultan has immense power, officials, slaved advisors, Ottoman decline, the Safavids, and the Abbas. The Mughals, China, the Mings, isolationism, kill them off, the Qing, king, nobles, knights, peasants, emperor, shogun, samurai, farmer. And then outside would be the daimyo, which would be merchants. In Japan, the government had no central power, so landowners and warriors were for hire, aka the samurai. Bushido was the way of the warrior. The emperor had no real power, but was an honorable position. Shoguns had the power and would fight for more of it. It would be the generals and leaders. Kamakura was a war between the Mongols and Shogun. In the 1200s, the Mongols attacked, but Japan would win because of unstable storms that would sink Mongol ships. Let's see, what else? Tokugawa, daimyo rule, got loyalty from them by training family members. Taking family members hostage brought prosperity to Japan. Feudal structure was more rigid. Peasants made up 80% of the populations. Artisans or merchants were considered dishonorable. Lower classes cannot rise in status and can go down. Tokugawa, peace means no need for more samurai. Women lost rights, welcomed European traders, but disliked missionaries and Christianity. In Korea, they had dynasties, which were governments based on Confucianism. Japan invades twice, but Korea is helped by China. China later invades and becomes a vassal state of China. And China become isolationist. Haikus were 575 poems. Then in terms of Spanish monarchy, King Charles I, considered an absolute monarch. Divine right meant that his right to rule was granted by God. King Charles I was also Charles V, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, aka the Pope. Dividing Spain, invade England, collapse of the empire, relied on agriculture instead of industry, French monarchy, Louis the 18th, went to war to reclaim lost territory, melted royal silver to pay for it. The Treaty of Utrecht meant that Louis's grandson gets the throne. France and Spain never ruled by the same person. France gave up territory previously taken, Russia and Central Europe. Russia was heavily behind in 1500s, ran by church officials and boyars. 1546, Ivan becomes Russia's first Tsar. The good years, the terrible years. Peter the Great, 70 years after Ivan. Catherine the Great. Henry VIII, Act of Supremacy. Charles I, English Civil War. Oliver Cromwell. Charles II, James II. William and Mary as joint rulers. Constitutional monarchy. And prime minister, which is the equivalent of a president. Okay, Age of Reason. Enlightenment. Jefferson and Franklin. Articles of Confederation. French Revolution. New government, Napoleon Bonaparte. Aftermath, new borders. Metternich's influence. Was the revolution a success? Technically, yes. Industrial Revolution. Industrialization, France, Asia. Factories, towns, factory system. Cottage worker unrest. Changing labor conditions, mass production. Capitalism. Socialism, electricity, communication, healthcare, migration, making cities livable, Victorian era, Chartism, Queen Victoria, longest reigning monarch in British history, Australia, prison colony, 1800s, copper and gold industry, especially gold over there in Melbourne. New England as a colony, Maori people traded. Dominion. Ireland, Know Nothings. Fugitive slave law, nationalism. Patriotism versus nationalism. Austria-Hungary. Ottoman Empire. Japanese imperialism. Africa, World War I, after the war, Japanese Empire, Hitler, Mussolini, German aggression, Atlantic Charter, Marshall Plan, NATO, Nikita Khrushchev, Korea, Mikhail Gorbachev, Vietnam War, China, Chinese Civil War, and that ends the end of that. Jesus Christ. Okay. Two more. Two more of these sons of bitches. Oh, these are just the BCAs for geometry. Okay, one more. One more. Yeah, for geometry class, the teacher would give us a before class assignment to demonstrate what we learned yesterday to see if any of it stuck. And I ended up passing those with flying colors, but when it come to coursework, that's where I fucked up tremendously. Okay. Uh-huh. Not exactly sure why I wrote this in pen, but okay. Psychology. Consciousness. Learning, classical conditioning. Memory. Thinking, intelligence, and language. Human development. Defining motivation. And that's the end of that. And then, after all that bullshit, got this. This is my diploma. This certifies that Nathan Trey McGathan has completed the course study prescribed by the Board of Education of the Senior High School and is therefore entitled to this diploma, given through Chase County Junior Senior High School this 18th day of May 2019. So, that's what I did throughout all of high school. And as you can see, 2 hours later, I have no idea why I held on to all this, but I did, and I don't regret it either. One of these days, when Winter goes through homeschooling, I'm going to be using that as reference material. That way I can teach her the way I was taught, because she deserves a good education like I got.